On the Daily Drive, Property Fast Track with Charles Tarbey. Thanks to Century 21. Smarter, bolder, faster. Go to century21.com.au.
Great to be here on this Monday night. Nick Bennett's my name, Kayley Harris next to me, and Charles Tarbey in the chair for Property Fast Track. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. How are you doing, Nick? Kaylee?
Hello,
Well.
Charles. Welcome. How was the weekend?
It was fantastic. Well, beautiful weekend weather-wise, wasn't it?
It was.
A little bit warm at the start, but
Yeah,
got a nice cloud cover in most parts of where I was. It was fantastic.
Good.
So from here on in, pretty quiet on the real estate front?
Yes, it should be. They just announced some of the latest results with auctions and vacancy rates and also listings coming on the market. It's been interesting to look at some of the reports that have just finally come out. CoreLogic Pain and Gain reports just been released today as well. So it tells some great stories about what the year has been like. And I think there are a lot of people now sort of settling down, ready for what we would see as a fairly steady real estate market from here on
Bit
out.
relaxed. I can see Charles is relaxed tonight. He's dropped the tie and opened the top button.
Oh, well, you know.
He's taken the yellow jacket off the Century 21 jacket.
I've only got two hairs on my chest and one of them's falling off. But I've gone grey and haven't reached
Too much
puberty
info there, Charles.
Sorry.
So this is I'm
Trying to show
suspecting-
off.
I reckon this is your last chance to pick the brains of Charles Tarbey. 13-12-83 before the year's out. 13-12-83 because Charles has got loads of experience in the real estate area. 40 years plus, commercial, resi, all of it, renting out places. So we'll have a look at what it all means as well and catch up with Nerida Conisbee tonight. This will be interesting, Charles.
A very well-informed young lady.
She's going to reveal the hottest suburbs of 2017 and think Tassie, think Victoria is the hot tip.
Well, there you go. I think that's what we've been tipping all year, isn't it?
Yes.
Especially Victoria anyway.
Yeah, particularly. Yeah. Now, we want to talk about the importance of social media in selling homes, Charles. This is off the back of a story from Melbourne. A house up for sale has gone viral after people on social media started drooling over the boys' toys fantasy aspects of the property. It was built by an architectural steelworker and features a whopping 142 square metre garage built with a fantastic rusted steel look. It's got a huge man cave with a built-in bar and a sound studio, a sunken gas fire pit, polished concrete barbecue bench tops, and it's had about 5,000 comments on it so far, and it's reached more than 500,000 people.
In Melaleuca Drive in Hastings. My folks used to live there when Dad was in the Navy.
In Hastings.
Yeah. Yeah, it looks pretty impressive. I mean, I don't know why you'd bother doing anything with the house. I think I'd just walk straight through the carport and go straight to the man cave.
Straight there, yeah, I think so. Well, social media is obviously really quite important. A lot of real estate practitioners have built their careers over social media in the last few years. Some a little bit out there, walking around half naked in houses or creating murder scenes in houses, all sorts of strange things, which was the go. But of course, when you get into real estate, which is where we're in right now, that is not going to sell the property for you. So a lot of social media is important, but it's what the best agents do once they establish contact with interested parties. That's the critical thing. You look at that and you can get thousands, millions of people look at it because it's quirky, it's funny, it gets shared. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing because you could be promoting that property and all of its wares inside of that man cave to the wrong people.
Oh, that's a very good point, isn't it? Because a lot of folks are quite reserved about how much exposure they may have when it comes to selling their property. They may not even want to reveal how much it's sold for.
That's exactly right. I remember real estate practitioners still today, they say, oh, look, let's open an office on the main road there. You've got 100,000 cars go past. I said, it's not about how many cars go past, how many people stop, how many vendors stop and look in your window. That's where you want access to. It's not about the 100,000 cars that can't stop. So I think a lot of the social media sometimes is just a lot of fun and can be very dangerous.
I guess the big question is, does it convert to sales?
That's it. That's the key.
And you're not convinced it does.
I guess that the other thing, Charles, is if you're using social media to try and find buyers for a property, they may not have looked at that property had it not got so much interest on social media. They may not have found it.
Marketing sells property. That's what it's about. Again, you can market a property, and the fact that the agent's got 5,000 comments or 350 shares, that's the indication I was talking about. It's being shared, and that's being shared for obvious reasons, not because it's a property that somebody might be interested in buying.
Just because they want to show their friends how
It could
cool
be,
it is.
It could
Right.
be.
I've got another. Sorry.
No, you go on. Just back to your point. That's extraordinary. So they reckon almost half 500,000 people have viewed this, and here we are reading this article with the address.
Yeah, what are we doing? So we're doing exactly the same thing. We're sharing the whole thing as well.
We are indeed.
Off
So,
it goes.
wow. So if I was that man who owned that house right now, what would I be doing? Hiring security guards.
Or he would be rediscovering a lot of old friends that hasn't seen for a while, I would say.
Now, I've got a question I've always wanted to know, Charles. You could probably answer this. You know those houses that you can win in those lotteries?
Oh, yeah.
You know, and you can on the Sunshine Coast, wherever they are. If you don't want to hang on to it and you want to sell it and get the cash, do they sell for what they are advertising them?
Look, it's very hard. It's like anything. Agents have been belted up for underquoting, belted up for overquoting. I think at the end of the day, what something might be worth, and you know, when you look at how much it costs to build and how much you put in furnishings and so on, I don't believe that they get to that value when you're going to sell them. I really don't. Because there's a lot of things loaded in that. You know, you're going to win a $2 million home, but that includes furniture, that includes this, landscaping, so on, so on. They're just great homes to buy because they're already ready, set up to go.
Yeah. Would you be better to hang on to it and rent it out maybe?
Some of those homes, they look too good to
rent
as an investment. Yeah. That's sort of property you might want to cash in and really get into some serious investment.
13 12 83 tonight. Charles Tarbey, if you have a question for real estate tonight, that's the number, 13 12 83, or message us and email at talkinglifestyle.com.au. So since it's the very last Property Fast Track for 2017, we thought we'd take a little look back at the year in property. Realestate.com.au released its list of Australia's most sought-after suburbs of 2017, and we're pleased to say tonight Nerida Conisbee, the chief economist at realestate.com.au, is here tonight. G'day. How are you, Nerida?
I'm well. How are you?
Good, thank you. So what came out on top for the most searched suburb in Australia this year?
Well, it was Melbourne's Elston Week. So, home of the block, and it certainly attracted a lot of attention, and that seemed to be the most in-demand suburb this year.
And can we attribute the fact that it's the home to the block to this success?
Yeah, look, for sure. I mean, you put a suburb on a national level, you certainly attracted a lot of attention to it, but it followed through with price growth, so we saw some pretty strong price growth as well in Elston Week.
All but one of the top 10 properties are in Victoria or Tasmania. Why is that, do you think?
Oh, look, Tasmania's been a standout performer on our site for quite some time, so it sort of pulled away from the Australian average mid-2015, but then this year we saw it being the strongest growth, Hobart being the strongest growth city in Australia. So, you know, I think that's part of it, that, you know, that high demand flows through to high price growth.
What sort of price... Sorry, Nerida. What kind of price growth are we talking about on average there in Tassie, in Hobart?
I think it's about the last 12, it was about 12.5%. We saw in Hobart, which, you know, rounding out the year, ended up being the strongest of all the capital cities.
And has it been a slow burner, Tasmania, or did it come on pretty quickly? Did it surprise you?
Look, it sort of started changing. It always tracked Australia, so it was never kind of a strong performer up until 2015, and then it pulled away, and it's been interesting because it's taken some time for price growth to kick in from that point, and it really wasn't until, you know, later this year that we really saw prices performing a lot better than the Australian average.
And does that mean we've all missed the boat if we want to invest in Tasmania and do well?
Oh, look, I don't think so. Look, we're still seeing very strong demand in Tasmania. I think the Tasmanian economy has changed a lot. It used to be very much a government-run town, but, you know, now we've got a lot of tourism, we've got a lot of hospitality, we've even got a really strong education sector. So I think that economy is changing, and that will support housing demand.
It needs to be also about jobs, and Hobart has had a fantastic pricing, which has attracted a lot of investors. Nerida, Charles, and I think that one of the issues that we've got to watch out for there, even though the Hobart city of Hobart and that all fantastic, we have to watch out that there's not over-investment there, and then that starts to reduce the rental return, or that starts to put investors at risk.
Absolutely. I mean, look, it's a small city. I think you have to remember the whole of Tasmania is only the size of the Gold Coast. So it is a small market. It is very prone to overinvestment. And so, you know, as in any city, really understanding the dynamics is really important.
Is it a worrying sign for the Sydney property market that Melbourne is really the last big city that's undervalued, do you think?
Well, Melbourne's interesting. It does tend to surprise on the upside, and I guess with property, it is a city where you can build more easily, and it has kept it a lot more affordable. And I think that's primarily the driver of it at the moment. We know that Sydney buyers of new apartments are still really interested in Melbourne CBD apartments, for example. We still see a lot of search activity coming out of Sydney there. And, I think the pricing at the moment, if you have a look at the average price apartment in Melbourne compared to Sydney, you're looking at sort of a $200,000 to $300,000 price difference. So, for a lot of investors, a lot of them are looking around that $500,000 price point, which if you go to Sydney, really limited, whereas if you go to Melbourne, there's tons to buy.
Nerida Conisbee is with us tonight. She's the chief economist at realestate.com.au. That's interesting you should say that Melbourne is an easier place to build compared to Sydney. Why is that?
Oh, it's flat. It's its planning restrictions aren't as strict. There's amalgamation of councils that really help the city. So, I think Melbourne kind of has a bit more of a build-it attitude, and, we certainly saw it post-GFC. It was quite some time ago now, but the 5 years following the GFC, Melbourne built twice as many houses and apartments than Sydney did. So, it's really come home now that it's compounded that price differential, and it has made Sydney a pretty challenging market for a lot of people to get into.
Well, Melbourne and Adelaide city councils have been far more, or state governments have been far more progressive than other states and territories across the country. There's no doubt about that. And they've got still planning more suburbs to be open, not just subdivisions, but suburbs, as with Canberra and certainly with Adelaide. Just more and more suburbs are opening up to cater for growth. And I think that's helped tremendously with pricing.
Anything else we can draw from the top 10? Charles, this year, Nerida has spoken a lot about the upsides of Canberra. What did you see there?
Yeah, look, Canberra didn't make it to the top 10, but Canberra has had phenomenal price growth. It's been up there with Melbourne and Sydney in terms of price growth. So, we can see on site that the north of Canberra is far more popular than the south. We still see very strong rental demand in Canberra. I think it's a market that you would be pretty, you'd find a tenant pretty easily. So, Canberra, it's definitely a market to have a look at. Yeah,
it's been my pick for a long time because it's safe. The employment issues, are not as much a concern as other parts of the country. And they've also created, as I mentioned earlier, a lot more suburbs. So they've always catered for growth. And it means that it's been steady in terms of its pricing, but it's incredibly solid when it comes to job security.
Yeah, absolutely.
And look, a bit of hope for people who are renting at the moment. Where have we seen rents drop across the country? Have you identified any places?
Yeah, the rental market's been quite good for the last 12 months. One of the things that has led from this record investment boom has been a lot of rental housing, and we can certainly see across Australia that rents have come down. Sydney in particular has been particularly good for renters. Its rental levels have come down a bit, but some suburbs we've found on site have come down a lot, and it's quite diverse. The locations that we're seeing prices come down range from Darling Point, which is a very prestigious inner city suburb, to out west near Penrith, Landillo, and then Box Hill further north. So there's been some really premium suburbs come down in price, which is obviously not great news if you're own those properties or own properties in those areas, but great news if you are a renter.
Probably means the market's just levelling out a bit and adjusting, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. They're not. It's not everywhere that's dropping, and you do have to be conscious that in some locations we do have quite variable housing, and that can make a bit of a difference to what happens with rental levels. But overall, the fact that rents are coming back is good news for renters. Prices in Sydney and Melbourne do seem to be stabilising a bit. So, we think a calmer market is a better market.
Yeah, it certainly is, Nerida. The rents were down this week, a minus 0.46% over last week. But the interesting one is that Perth climbed. It was up 0.96%, whereas Hobart dropped 1.29%, which has always been my concern, that there might be overinvestment and the investors are going to have to compete. So the rents are moving in different directions in different parts of the country.
Yeah, look, you do need to watch them closely. But, Perth is interesting on our site. We are seeing, buyer demand increase month to month and even year on year now. So, I think if you are an investor, Perth premium suburbs, those inner west and those northern beaches suburbs are certainly ones to watch.
And Nerida, before you go, just to wrap the year in review, 2017, what did you notice in Brisbane as far as sales prices being achieved and then also the rental market there?
Yeah, I mean, we saw buyer demand for houses continue to hold up in Brisbane. Obviously, apartments were a little bit, were hit a bit with those levels of oversupply. I think the thing with Brisbane apartments, though, is that, you know, if you've got a really good apartment in a really good location, it's probably still in high demand from not just buyers and renters. It's really a lot of that apartment stock that was built for investors that seems to be struggling. So, you know, overall we're pretty positive about Brisbane. I think the level of supply has now really come back down, and next year that, you know, we're not seeing much construction activity. So yeah, all positive for Brisbane.
Good on you, Nerida. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Nerida Conisbee there, the Chief Economist at realestate.com.au. And Charles, just want to run something by you as well. This is something that, you know, I've thought about for a long time. When you buy a house, it's probably the biggest outlay that you'll have in your life financially, and you can't try and buy. You can't say, "Can I go and
test the street?" Test
yeah,
the
can I go and
Yeah,
you know?
You can test a mattress out. I worked that out today. Apparently, it's a 40-day give back if you don't like it.
Yeah, but with a house, I mean, why can't you go and move in for a week and just sort of go and meet the neighbours and think,
but even if you did, I think, you know, like everybody puts their best foot forward first, and it just a few months later it still settles back. You find out a lot about a suburb just by driving down the street. You can see which properties, or whether there's a care of ownership, which is a very, very important thing in when you're buying a property. And if you see a lot of properties that are unkempt, and there are definitely going to be issues there, people may not be as interested, and you might end up with a great house in a really bad street. The other thing you can also do is it doesn't take much to knock on a few different doors, which is something I'm very accustomed to, and just saying to people, hey, what's it like living here? I'm thinking about moving in this area. What's this street line? And invariably they'll tell you about the neighbour down the road. You know, I've said this to you before, Nick, you can find out whose checks are good and whose husbands are not very, very quickly by door knocking a street.
That's classic. It is a leap of faith, though, isn't it, when you buy into a place? I mean, let's say you buy July or August and you're a shift worker.
Oh.
And it just so happens that you land in a street in a particular suburb that prides itself on having every single house decorated to the nth degree with Christmas lights, which I love. But if you're a shift worker, I don't know how you'd sleep.
I don't know how you'd sleep either. The lights are going to be on in my street because I'm going to be home for a change. So there'll be lights on, but no Christmas lights.
But if you're
outside.
a shift worker, aren't you sleeping during the day and the lights aren't on?
Oh, don't spoil it for me.
sorry.
I was trying to make a point.
I didn't know what he was talking about either. But
Just go with it. I don't know half the time either.
Property Fast Track, it is 13 12 83. Nick and Kayley and Charles Tarbey here tonight. Taking your calls if you need some guidance with real estate. Charles is here to help. Property Fast Track, the last one for the year. Charles Tarbey's here tonight, taking your calls, 13 12 83. Now let's get a local area real estate snapshot as we go round the grounds. Thanks to Century 21's extensive national network of real estate agents, and on the line tonight is Sasan Rahmani from Century 21 Benowa, postcode 4217 on the Gold Coast.
I particularly wanted to get Sasan on tonight, Nick and Kayley, because I thought with the Commonwealth Games coming up in just a few months' time, April I think it is, it'd be interesting to see what the impact has been, because a lot of people talk about what the market's like coming into and going out of. So, Sasan, you're the man.
Good afternoon, Charles. How are you?
Good. It's early evening where we are, you know, because you guys seem to have curtain problems. They fade a lot quicker in daylight saving. Yeah.
And the cows come home late.
Sasan, tell us about your area. Exactly where is it and what's great about it?
Okay, well, Benowa is one of the most central suburbs in the middle of Gold Coast, and actually that's where the Commonwealth Games main stadium and the opening and the closing ceremony is going to be. And it's very central to everything. You have about 10 or 15 minutes drive to Central Broad Beach and Surfers Paradise or Robina Shopping Centre.
Okay, so what sorts of buyers are you seeing in the area?
Well, we have seen recently a lot of owner-occupiers coming into the area. There is a lot of facilities within the Benowa catchment area, schools, private schools, shopping centres, hospitals, and the suburb itself is growing very rapidly with a lot of owner-occupiers and young families moving into the area.
And it's not very far to Coolangatta Airport. It's quite close, isn't it?
Yes, with M1, the freeway, about 20 minutes drive.
Yeah.
in Coolangatta, and up north you're about within 45 minutes to Brisbane CBD.
To Brisbane, and there's also been some good road improvements on that stretch of road. Yes.
Yes, because I'm guessing, and I think because of the Commonwealth Games all around the Benowa, which is the where the stadium is going to be, there's been a lot of infrastructure spending by private and government agencies.
So, Sasan, from your point of view, what has the Commonwealth Games itself done for your area?
Well, it has been very noticeable in the last few months. In the level of inquiries that we are getting, especially from interstate, from New Zealand, from Canberra, Victoria, Sydney, all around Australia, we're getting a lot of inquiries in the last few months, and that has increased. And a lot of people are moving into this area. A lot of people want to invest in this area.
Is it mainly homes that you have there, Sasan, or do you have a lot of units?
Look, there is a diverse category of different dwellings here, houses, duplexes. Sunland Group is building the final stage of a development at the marina in Royal Pines, which is in Benowa, and that particular development is doing very well. We have sold just over 60%.
Sunland have developed quite a few fantastic stages of either residential or marina life or apartment living. They're a very progressive organisation.
Yes.
So Sasan, for you at the end of the day, there was an oversupply of stock on the Gold Coast for some time. So for you now at the end of the day, is that supply diminishing?
It is starting to diminish. The inquiries have definitely increased, and obviously that leads to sales. And I can tell you, by managing the Marina Concourse sales rate for Sunland, the level of inquiries have definitely increased, and we have had a lot of sales in the last few months. And you can feel the enthusiasm, you can feel the
change.
Yeah,
the change,
Sasan,
Sasan,
we're going to have to leave it there. It's a really dodgy phone line, but thank you so much for your time, Sasan Rahmani there from Century 21 at
Merry
Benowa.
Christmas to you and the family, Sasan.
Thanks, Sasan.
Property Fast Track tonight. Charles Tarbey with us, 13 12 83. Last chance, ladies and gentlemen. Do I get a knockdown? I'm talking like an auctioneer now because Tom Panos is joining us. He's an auctioneer and a 2-decade veteran of the business. Good evening, Tom, and welcome to Property Fast Track.
Good evening. Third and final call.
Get on you, mate.
I got excited there. I could smell the finish line, and I have just got this air of optimism, knowing that I'm not going to be putting on a suit on a Saturday. And it's been really the last 4 or 5 weeks. The buyers have turned on us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you worked very, very hard this past month, harder than you have perhaps at the beginning of the year.
Yes, harder. When I compare my February to my November, December, Nick, I had a spring in my step. I used to go in there and I used to say to the buyers in the room, line up and register here and wait your turn, everyone. And that's no longer the case.
Right.
It's ease. We're still getting. I had a good sale on Saturday, but the 90% are gone, and I've just have to accept that we're selling about half the properties at auction.
So, Tom, what's your national forecast for 2018 on the auction front?
Look, I don't like making forecasts, Nick, because the first week of the true open houses, late Jan, early February, set the tone. Charles will tell you, markets change very quickly. What actually happens, a mood changes, sentiment changes, and the word gets around. If I'm going to have a prediction based on what I'm seeing now, there's nothing for me to feel like the market's all of a sudden going to change and we're going to get double the inquiry. I think people are sort of accepting that this is the new world, that prices aren't going crazy, that vendors are doing a little bit of price correction, and that life is moving on. I will be concerned if they start playing with interest rates on an upward pressure.
Okay.
Yeah, that is probably the biggest concern, Tom. All the markets are settling down, even Melbourne's settling down. They had 1,628 auctions on the weekend compared to Sydney's 690, which is really quite substantial. But it's settling back to a very steady market, and I expect next year will open up with a lot more stock, fewer buyers, and better real estate practitioners who are able to work those transactions together.
Well, Charles, you're known as being the king of predicting what a clearance rate will be 1 year ahead. I'm looking at our weighted average nationally is now 64%, 64.2%. If you were to have a guess that we're sitting on this radio station in a year's time, what do you think that number is going to be?
I actually think that number will probably be in the high 50s, early 60s still. Does that make you happy, Tom?
Well, Charles, you're outstanding at covering yourself because you basically said anything from 56 to 64.
Well, you've got to give a price range,
Got
Tom.
him,
Yeah,
yay.
being a price range. I'll see you after the show, mate. I know where you are. I'm going to find you.
Tom, what did you make of Brisbane over the weekend? Did you get a chance to have a look in there?
Yes, I did. Probably had their highest clearance rate for some time, 55%. And I spoke to a few of the agents there, and they told me that they were very happy. There was 196 properties that went to auction, and their clearance rate for the year went up from 42% this time last year to 54%, and hooray to Brisbane.
And they only had 133 auctions this time last year, Tom. The interesting thing is that for the last few weeks, Brisbane, Adelaide and Perth have had better clearance rates than what they did this time last year for the last 3 weeks, while all other capital cities have gone backwards. So what's that telling you?
Well, I think what it's saying is that maybe there's a bit of price fatigue in Sydney and Melbourne, and there's opportunity money going into those other places.
Yep. Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? So now that you've mentioned Sydney, how did it do over the weekend?
60%, only 690 properties went to auction, and that's about 12% or 11% lower than what it was this time last year. So there wasn't a lot of properties. I mean, 690 is not a great number for Sydney. At 60%. I had a property that did well in Cairnsea, which was encouraging because it was a development site, single property, and seeing developers there made me feel optimistic that they still think that there's money in the marketplace. And they fought it out. You know, Park Street Campsie, they fought it out.
That's interesting you should say that, Tom. What does that say about the market when the investors are still happy to come out, the developers are still happy to come out and pay possibly almost a premium in a fairly heady market still?
Well, they're betting against the public. They're sort of saying, I actually think there's still money in this marketplace, and I'm prepared at the right number. Having said that, the reserve was 2.5. It sold for $2,460,000, so only $40,000. You know, a guy that owned the house for 60 years, he's moved into a nursing home, and he's very happy.
Tom, there's an interesting thing happening right now. The banks are actually opening their doors to investors again. I don't know whether you've heard about this, but working with a couple of bankers recently, they're talking we need more investors now. How funny is that, given that they were pushing them away? They're now finding that they need to balance the books again. So it's all changing, Tom.
Yeah, I heard that too, Charles, and that's encouraging because I think that they're realising that a customer is a customer.
Yeah, exactly.
Tom,
Thanks,
love
Tom.
your work.
We love you. Thank you for your expertise over the past 12 months and have a great Christmas.
Yeah, Grania Pola, Tom.
You too, Grania Pola, which means Merry Christmas in Greece. Guys, thank you so much. Have a good break, and we'll talk in the new year.
Great, thanks. Tom Panos there. And Charles, happy Christmas to you
very
as
much,
well.
Kaylee.
And thank you for everything this year.
I'll drive past. I know your address. Look for the Christmas lights at
Well,
your
no
house.
worries.
And you too, Nick.
Yeah,
Thank you.
mate, it's been a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you very
I've learned a
much.
lot past the year. It's been fantastic to get your insights into real estate. So we look forward to seeing you again in 2018. And thanks for your support here
Thank
at
you.
Macquarie Media this year.
Thanks, guys.